So continuing on with the best and worst in every single Souls game, today we have Dark Souls. Now we are going to merge the original Dark Souls and the remastered together in this list. Not going to touch on things that are just specifically bad for one or the other, which remastered is basically just a direct upgrade as it did fix a whole bunch of problems that the older game did have. And it served perfectly fine as a remaster. I know people would have liked for it to be a bit different. The remaster could have had some more quality of life, like being able to respec or not going immediately into New Game Plus. Could have had some changes to the UI as well. Because yeah, Dark Souls honestly has not aged very well. And this is coming from a person whose first game was Dark Souls 1 over 10 years ago. So someone like myself can play this game perfectly fine, but I can't imagine if you were to start off with a game like Elden Ring or Dark Souls 3, then go back to Dark Souls 1. It might not make for the most amazing experience, and you probably won't appreciate it as much. If you are a person that has actually done that, just let me know what your opinions are on Dark Souls 1 down in the comments. But as an old game, it still does plenty of things better than some of the other games out there. So today we are going to go over the top 3 best and worst things that are unique to Dark Souls 1. But to get started on the positives, just gonna get it out of the way now, the interconnected world. Not gonna really break it down too much as it has been glazed enough. Now the individual levels themselves aren't really the best, but it's the fact that all these areas connect to each other so perfectly, it kind of makes it seem like it's its own big giant level. It just is masterful world design. Almost every single section in the first part of the game just flows seamlessly with each other. It also gives the freedoms to explore many areas without restriction, which helps with the exploration and build creation. And it also gives you that special feeling of actually being immersed into a world, which I don't think there's any other Souls game out there that probably does it as well as Dark Souls 1. There are games that come close like Bloodborne, maybe even Elden Ring, when it comes to being this immersed and invested. But Dark Souls 1 does do it the best, which is probably going to lead perfectly into my second positive point, which is probably the overall world design, setting, and aesthetic, which this one might be a bit of bias because the theme and setting of Dark Souls 1 is probably what got me into the series. It is the most medieval game of the bunch, and every single area just like matches the tone of this theme perfectly. And with this realistic setting, it does give it more of a homey type of vibe, which I actually did get asked a question recently, talking about why Dark Souls 1 feels more homey than the others. And the realistic setting is part of that, but it also is because it's a smaller scaled game with tighter corridors, and it just makes it feel more cozy overall. And when you take into account the interconnected world, it gives you more of a sense that you have explored everything the game has to offer, inherently just making you feel more safe. Whereas for other types of games that have like a larger scale or just more linear, you always end up having that feeling that there's just more stuff out there that the game is just not going to let you be able to explore. And Dark Souls 1 accomplishes all of this, all while having different areas that look different from each other and retain the exact same type of vibe, which is definitely one underrated part about like world design or even level design as a whole, is having different areas that actually look a bit different to each other. Sometimes it can be a bit boring and repetitive just going through the same type of area back to back to back, but on this game, they actually hit you with like lots of different realistic types of areas that still vary enough to make them feel different. And when the game actually does show you a really cool fantasy looking area, it just hits so much better. So for me personally, I just like the aesthetic, the theme, the setting in Dark Souls 1 more so than any other Souls game. Which conveniently enough, the world building aspect is also going to lead into my next point about the NPCs. Like the world building of Dark Souls 1 is just flawless, and the NPCs are a big part of that. Every single one is iconic, memorable, delivers some of the most infectious lines of dialogue. It might just be like the nostalgia speaking, but I've never found as much enjoyment in learning about the NPCs in a game as much as this one. Trying to help Solaire find his son, learning about how he ruined Siegmeyer's chance of dying a hero's death, understanding why the Firekeepers are in their positions, realizing why they call him Big Hat Logan. It is all a fantastic showcase of great storyboarding and amazing world building. But as for the downsides, obviously they're not going to be without any. It is an older game and it is one of their first attempts at a Souls game, so it wasn't going to be the most ambitious or creative thing. When you do compare it to some of these newer ones that we do have, like the Souls games that we have nowadays are so grand and over the top, that it might kind of seem like that Dark Souls 1 is lacking a little bit, so I don't want to be too harsh on the game. Actually, I lied, yes I do. The pacing of Dark Souls 1 fucking sucks. Now this is mainly true for the second half of the game, which don't worry, we will get there. But even the first half of the game has some questionable areas in terms of progression. Yes, you do have all those sections that interconnect, but there are a handful of areas in the first half that don't even connect to each other, and are also not even the intended path for early game, and when the game doesn't explain it to the player, it can make it pretty frustrating. Places like the Catacombs, Tomb of the Giants, where if you're a newer player that managed to reach the bottom, God bless. Same thing can be said for areas like New Londo Ruins or even Blighttown if you grab the Master Key. And if you made the mistake of going all the way down to Ash Lake before you get the Lord Vessel, I would honestly just start a brand new character. Like, the master key is so cool to have for build creation, but if you're a new player, you really miss out on that experience and feeling of having to go through the Undeadburg, the depths, Blighttown, and have it wrap all the way back around to Firelink Shrine. The master key kind of spoils that feeling for you, but the only thing that I think is missing to fix this first half pacing issue is if the Homeward Bone worked like they did in Dark Souls 3, to where it actually gives you the option to teleport back to the Firelink Shrine as well as the last bonfire. So that way, you still actually don't need to have fast travel, but it actually incentivizes exploring these other locations that aren't connected, which it could also result in players abusing it so they don't actually experience the interconnected world still. But the only way Dark Souls 1 gets away with not having fast travel is because of the areas that connect. So it makes it kind of weird when you have a bunch of these areas that don't. Now, as for the second half of the game, it just takes a massive nosedive. Basically turns the level progression into like a reverse Dark Souls 2, and that instead of the first half of the game where you have like 4 different linear paths, it's now in the second half. And it's literally done worse here because it just lazily adds these locations at the end of every single one of these areas that already exist. Therefore, you're not only backtracking through the same places that you've already been to, because for some reason we can only fast travel to some specific bonfires, not all of them, but also the new areas are just covering the same aesthetics as the one in the first part of the game. But the level design of them is just worse. Which honestly, I might as well just talk about the second half of Dark Souls 1 as its own subject outside of the pacing, because yeah, it is not good at all. Which yes, From Software did run out of time so they couldn't finish it, but honestly, unfinished games is not an excuse. But yeah, as soon as you reach Analondo, the absolute peak of the game, they decide to just have you go through the same types of areas as you did in the first half, but worse. Tomb of the Giants is somehow a more obnoxious catacombs with a very disappointing boss. Going through New Londo Ruins after understanding that you have to come back later in the game, as the game just so kindly decided against telling us first, which just ends up souring the experience. Now, Duke's Archives is the only area that is aesthetically different compared to the ones that precede it, but the level design is just 4 fucking rectangles, and the Crystal Cave is pretty, but it's empty, and it just serves the purpose of being an unnecessarily long boss run back. Which, speaking of boring long boss run backs, we have the kiln of the first flame to the final boss. There's a big empty area, does look cool, but there's only like 3 enemies there. And then the final boss just fucking sucks. Like, the entire boss fight is not even balanced around Dark Souls 1 mechanics, and 99% of people just spend the entire time just parrying it anyway. The guy doesn't even get any lightning attacks. Like, the only good things about the second half of Dark Souls 1 is Gwyn's theme and that funny slide down to the Better Chaos in Lost Izalith, which honestly, I'm just gonna talk about Lost Izalith as the final point in itself. I was gonna talk about things like the clunkiness of the game with its 4-directional rolling, weapons bouncing off walls, the shitty hitboxes, but the whole Demon Ruins and Lost Izalith is just an absolute masterpiece of dog shit. This whole location is nothing but a big giant fucking eyesore, riddled with copy-pasted enemies from bosses that we fought earlier in the game. Like, why the hell did they just decide to add 20 different Taurus demons in this one location guarding one random fucking item? Who knows? Why did they decide to add 25 million dragon butts in this massive lava swamp when not a single one of these guys are actually fun to fight? And you spend the entire time trying to figure out what's going on because the camera shake in this game is absolutely horrendous, and every single stomp just puts you into a fucking seizure. And while you're running through this place, your ears are bleeding because the stupid lava sound effect is just terrible. Now, in the section directly afterwards, some of the enemies do look pretty cool. I like some of their designs. Level design still kind of sucks, but at least some of the enemies look cool. But then there's the bosses. Like, the bosses after Quelaag are an absolute giant monstrosity. Going from Ceaseless Discharge, which that is a dog shit boss that I guarantee like nobody's actually fought legit. And if you do, you're probably either using spells or you just hate your life. And then you have the Fire Sage Demon, which is basically just the exact same thing as the Stray Demon, like identical moves. It just lit on fire and called the Fire Sage Demon, despite it being weak to fire damage and actually dealing magic damage. Like, yeah, that stupid AoE attack actually does magic damage because the Stray Demon does that, but they didn't even bother changing it to fire damage for the Fire Stage Demon. And then you go ahead and fight the worst boss in the entire game as of that point in the Centipede Demon, which this entire fight, you have no fucking clue what's going on. Like, somebody explain to me what's happening right now, because combined with the stupid ass camera bouncing up and down and the whole camera shake for every single move that this guy actually has, your entire brain just shuts off and stops thinking about any positive thing that this thing had going for it. But somehow, some way, they actually made a boss that's worse than the Centipede Demon in the fucking bed of chaos. Which, as I mentioned earlier, the most fun part about the game is going down the cool ass slide. And upon going down this slide, you actually reach the lowest point in the game, literally and figuratively. Is it hard? No. Is it like the most frustrating thing in the world? No. But the combination of it being just some shitty ass gimmick that involves you running left to right and having to deal with the stupid clunky ass mechanics of Dark Souls 1 is just insult to injury over the actual main problem that this is a mandatory boss that's one of the most important characters in the entire series. Like, this boss is the result of the entire Demon Ruins going to shit Like, you traverse this giant hellhole riddled with all these cool ass looking demons, and at the very heart of it is a fucking tree. Like, why'd you make one of the most important characters a fucking tree that's being controlled by a bug? Anyway, that is me done talking about probably my most cherished and one of my favorite games of all time. As always, let me know what your opinions are down in the comments below, and also let me know what Souls game you would like to see next. Anyway, catch you guys around. Bye.